Good afternoon. This feels really loud, which is probably good. So my name is Sandra, and I'm an anthropologist based at the University of Copenhagen. And I'm really gonna talk a little bit about the research project I'm working on. It's a 3-year project on neighbor noise, and it's funded by Grundejernes Investeringsfond. In English, that will be the Land Investment Fund of Landowners, and Realdania. And so it's quite a typical anthropological project in the sense that it's very explorative, and it's based primarily on qualitative interviews, where I'm really exploring how do inhabitants of flats experience the sounds in these flats, and especially how do they experience the sounds of their neighbors, and when do they experience these sounds as noise. So that's what I'm mainly interested in, finding sort of patterns and tendencies as to when they experience these sounds as noise. I'm also interested in sort of exploring the discourses around noise that they are shaped of and they are part of shaping, I guess. And therefore I'm also talking to different professionals who work with neighbor noise in different ways. Yeah. So this question that the lovely organizers sent us, what is noise? In the case of the project I'm working on, noise is really whatever my interlocutors are telling me that it is, right? So it's really, I'm really interested in their experiences of noise and their definitions of noise. So to the inhabitants, of course, it's very much, what I'm interested in is very much how they experience noise in the context of their homes. And to the professionals, it's in the context of their disciplines, of course. So it's also implying a lot of different notions of knowledge around noise and how to sort of talk about those across disciplines, which I find extremely interesting and extremely challenging, and I'm hoping we're going to solve that in the next few days, right? But I want to say a little bit more about the home as a specific context, because I think it's a really important context to understand why people get so, or can get so extremely frustrated about sounds stemming from their neighbors that they experience as noise. So very roughly put, the home as a particular context, at least in Scandinavia, the home is expected to be a place of privacy and safety, a place for resting in safety, and a place that one has control over. And these sort of expectations is, of course, what is challenged sometimes by the sounds of others. So from a material point of view, I think of the home as made up of walls and, of course, ceilings and floors that separate the homes visually, but are often more or less acoustically permeable. So in a sense, homes in multi-story buildings are connected through sound. And to a high degree, that's not a negative thing in itself, of course. People tell me all the time about how they can hear their neighbors and how they can find that quite nice. It can be like a way of, I'm thinking about it as a collective sonic rhythm, right? So you can be part of each other's lives in a sort of distance and not so, how do you say, it's an uncommittable way, but you're still part of a community. So there's all these different examples that I'm not going to go into because we don't have so much time, but you can sort of sense what the others are doing and how the day is passing and how it's becoming the weekend and da-da-da-da-da. And that can all be very positive. And then, of course, what I'm particularly interested in is what I think of sort of the switch. When does it stop being positive and why? What is it? So what is it that happens when this feeling of being part of a collective sonic rhythm is suddenly, or maybe not suddenly, maybe over time, replaced with a feeling of an invasion of privacy? Because that's very much what people talk about, and they can talk about it in very frustrated terms, and there can be a big sense of, how do you say that, feeling, like people talk a lot about the neighbors as showing a lack of respect or a lack of consideration. It can be very sort of intense. And there can be a lot of different reasons causing this switch. I'm not actually going to go into that because it's too huge, I think, but I would love to talk more about it. What I'm thinking about these days is that there's an interesting contrast I find between this righteous sort of feeling of somebody is harming my privacy, and then another feeling that several people have told me about, which is the feeling of shame. So when some people, when they feel, they tell me about this feeling, feeling disturbed by the noises of others, but also feeling shameful about it. And I think that's interesting. And I think, of course, it's part of when is it that you can't sort of contain the sounds of the others, and what does that say about you, and what does that mean, of course. Yeah, so one of my interlocutors put it this way. She said this about when she was reflecting on the shame that she felt when she couldn't sort of, when she felt really disturbed by the sounds other people were making insides of their homes, right? So I think it's too much that I cannot accommodate to other people in their homes. It's very simple, but it's very sort of, and a very intense feeling that can also be sort of blocking, because then what do you actually do about it? So I sort of said this, but the approach to noise that I'm working with is to try to explore the experiences and understandings that I meet of noise. And to inhabitants, of course, is in the context of their homes. To professionals, it can be the way that they work with buildings, neighbor relations, decibels. It can be lots of different things. But I guess this also implies that the notion of noise that I meet is often the negative part of sound, right? It's often what people usually think of as noise is when sound becomes disturbing. So it's not really utterly or sort of more progressive notions of sound. So to me in this project, and hopefully to some of you, and hopefully this is something we can discuss, some of the major challenges is to discuss noise in transdisciplinary terms, which I find extremely important, but also difficult, especially across this qualitative and quantitative research, because it's obvious that it can sort of feed into each other, but how do we actually communicate about what it is when we have such different notions about knowledge, actually? And I guess the two are very closely linked, because in the field that I'm working in, noise in terms of quantifiable health risks is very sort of something, it may not be widely sort of recognized, but it's still something that you can point at research and say it's like this, which I think is really important, but I would like to supplement it with something else so that I don't find myself keep going back to the negative health consequences. To enlarge that, how do we express the possible negative consequences of noise in other terms than quantifiable health risks? And then the third one I put up there is very specific to my project, is this tendency that some people, maybe especially professionals, also some inhabitants, have of closing down any discussion by saying that people have become less considerate and less tolerant, and that's just end of it. So I might be repeating myself a little bit here, but when we think about the question of where should work on noise be taken next, I really think that a workshop like this is great, because I think the transdisciplinary field or collaboration have so much to sort of offer, but there's a lot of work to be done. And then I'm repeating, the health consequences of noise exposure are important, but we need to be clear on other sort of consequences of noise. How can we term that? And I may actually have made it too short, because I'm done.